Hello everyone, it's your girl Columbia. How are you? I'm fine. Let's get into it. So, little housekeeping. Number one, I've missed you too. Don't worry, Mama's back. She's doing stuff. I've got pounds of crap that's recorded. It just has to be put together. So don't worry. Mama is still making videos. But Mama has problems with her motivation and being slow. Okay, let's respond to someone who deserves no real response. NPC Duggo on Twitter. Duggo Kovifi. Let's get into it. So I'm going to read the tweets and we will respond in kind. I have no hope for far leftists, but I hope Democrats and liberals will realize that if they keep apologizing for illegal immigration, the left will ultimately lose and the far right will rise. Stop defending illegal migration. Stop defending illegal caravans. I say this because the far right always uses illegal migration as a means to gain popularity. And then any other good liberal policy like healthcare, women/LGBT rights, climate change, secularism, legal pot, etc. get thrown under the bus. All because leftists care more about illegals. Defending caravans, which are pushed by far-left migrant activists, is going to divide in Mexico, and then the far right will rise, just like in Europe and the US. The moderate left needs to get real about immigration and accept that protecting illegal migration is counterproductive. So there are a lot of problems with this thread overall, but first let's talk about the use of language here. This is important. Oftentimes people on the left get accused of being language police. Anybody who's seen me on Twitter knows I'm pretty willy-nilly with the shit I say. But what I don't do is use our enemy's rhetoric in a way that's unironic. I always frame our enemy's rhetoric, our opponent's rhetoric, because our opponents and our enemies aren't the same thing. I always frame their rhetoric as something to ridicule or something stupid or something to analyze or overcome. I don't use their rhetoric to appeal to people. And one of the biggest problems with this thread, I should say, is that it repeatedly uses the language of the far right and the right to communicate a message to Democrats and liberals. Now, I went to several news outlets, those that would be called moderate, centrist, neutral, what have you, all that's in quotes. I'm doing quote fingers for all of them. I went to a whole bunch of liberal, progressive blogs, YouTube channels, news outlets. I went to a few conservative. I went to the Washington Examiner. And then I went to several Latino advocacy and nonprofit websites, all of which will be linked in the description. And one thing that I found was that illegals was not in their vocabulary. Illegals is an insult. And that's a frame and that's a word, and that is a concept that's used by everything from fascists, self-admitted, all the way up to conservatives. Albeit, many conservative outlets are trying to distance themselves from that rhetoric. The reason that I'm on this is that Latinx people are the fastest growing demographic in the United States. They are one of the fastest growing demographics in the Democratic Party. And by using a disparaging term to describe people who may be their countrymen, who they may look like, who they may sympathize with, for whom immigration, migration, refugee status, undocumented status, asylum status may be something that is an immediate political concern, you are alienating them and you are insulting them. If politicians started to talk like this, Democratic politicians started to talk like this, they would be voted out of office. The fact that you think that immigration takes away from other policies is telling. Because immigration intersects with all of the things that you mentioned. The ability to obtain and keep health care, women's LGBTQ plus rights. In fact, many of the individuals in the caravan are themselves LGBTQ plus. So, just to be a pedantic bitch and a womp on this motherfucker, I went through the National Democratic Party, i.e. the DNC's Democratic Party platforms for the last 24 years, from 1992 until 2016, which is the most recent. And in only one did I find a mention of secular. Everyone knows how you search within a document. If I just start typing in secular, then secularism would appear. And I only found, out of 24 years of Democratic Party platforms, I only found one party platform that mentions secular, and it's under faith. Faith-based organizations are not a replacement for government or secular nonprofit programs. Rather, they are yet another sector working to meet the challenges of the 21st century. In 24 years of Democratic Party platforms, the word secular is only mentioned once. No mention of secularism. That is not a Democratic Party issue. I had to re-record this because I thought, well, maybe let me see if I can find any mention. Let me not just put down this point, because maybe it is something the Democratic Party puts in their planks, but, we just don't read them. Nope. Wasn't there. Maybe it's mentioned in one of the state party platforms, but the national platform sets the state's agendas. Secularism is effectively a niche issue that really, liberal atheists care about. The Democratic Party, like the Republicans, are out to capture as much of the electorate as possible, and the majority of the electorate identifies as religious. So the Democratic Party isn't going to appeal to what a very small minority, irreligious, liberal people want. So the idea that secularism is somehow an issue that's being, ignored because of immigration is ridiculous. It's not an issue that the Democrats have taken into account for the last 25 years. I think that you're really showing your ass and showing that you're not as familiar with these topics as you think you are. The issues of climate change, migration, and immigration are deeply interconnected. Human migration is a driver of climate change. Granted, it is one factor inside of a broader scope of population trends that are drivers for climate change, but it's an important factor. And migration and immigration are consequences of climate change. Whether it is rural to rural, whether it is rural to urban, or international, where people are leaving their countries, all of them have similar effects. People gain greater access to meat, which means you have to raise more cattle, more pigs, more chickens, etc. You have to raise more vegetables. You have increased demands on electricity. Even if someone is sending remittance back home, they're giving their family the opportunity to gain access to those things. Now, in terms of migration as a result of climate change, when you have farmers that are dependent upon a river to flood so that they can get the silt and use the silt to grow food, and there's a drought, and that drought is sustained, then those farmers have to find a different source of income to feed their families. And the larger the scale of that problem, the wider the area of the drought, the more people it impacts, the more people have to migrate. So first, people tend to go from rural areas to urban areas within their own countries. And when they've exhausted urban areas, they then move out of their own countries. So not only do you have people not only is migration one factor in a broader set of factors that cause climate change, that are drivers for climate change, but it's also a consequence of climate change. So you're getting impacted on both sides. People are just sort of migrating and immigrating because of what could be called almost natural fluctuations in economic markets. And people are migrating fleeing because their environment is being directly impacted by climate change and it's causing them economic adversity. One thing that most, if not all, of the policy institutes surrounding either climate change specifically or immigration/migration specifically recommend, the one thing that all of the policy institutes that I went to surrounding either climate change as an issue or either climate change as an issue or migration/immigration as an issue is that getting policy that addresses that interconnected nature, that addresses the consequences, the migratory consequences of climate change is an imperative. And it's an imperative right now. And also because of the global scale of this problem and the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of different environments involved and the millions of variables, it is difficult for organizations to produce reliable projections. So, on top of the two problems you already have, you've now got the additional problem of trying to convince policymakers to make law without the urgency that statistics can provide. But they all agree that it's an imperative that we deal with this now. Because if you think that 500 people is a threat to the United States or influences the global rise of fascism, wait until it's 50,000 people or 100,000, which is possible. It is well within the realms of possibility. By calling someone an illegal, what you're doing is boiling a human being down to a specific act, right? These aren't people who are fleeing adverse economic and political conditions, and in some cases, conditions that we fostered and helped to create. These are people who are doing something illegal. And what you've done here is what fascists, Republicans, conservatives do. Link illegality to criminality. And they stoke fear by making all of these individuals criminals, when in fact, what they're doing as asylum seekers is not illegal. And most people who immigrate to the United States are not criminals.
Now, conservative immigration arguments essentially now follow a pretty clear pattern. Crossing the border is a crime, therefore anyone crossing it is a criminal, and since all criminals are dangerous, anyone crossing the border is a dangerous criminal. Never mind the fact that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than people born here. That has simply not stopped Republicans from running toxic anti-immigrant, anti-caravan political ads like these.
Nor is this the way that terrorists would choose to enter the United States. We know because in the last terrorist attacks that have happened, or the last attacks that have happened in the United States, were perpetuated by U.S. citizens. We also, or by people who were here legally. We also know that the hijackers who were in the United States prior to 9/11 and committed the acts of 9/11 were here on clean visas, because you don't want any suspicion. So you don't do anything illegal, and you don't hire people who could have criminal record or who could be linked to criminality. So by linking these individuals to criminality, you stoke fear amongst the population, and then you use that fear as a wedge. And that is exactly what the Republicans are doing, and that is exactly what fascists want, because fascists don't fundamentally believe in these individuals' personhood to begin with. Fascists specifically, and this is generic amongst all fascists believe in inferiority and superiority, based on whatever the majority of the population possesses. If a country was majority black, fascists would say black people are the superiors, everyone else is inferior, and they should leave the country. But it doesn't necessarily have to be racial. It can be based on sexuality. It can be based on ethnicity. It can be based on religion. Ultimately, fascists will use whatever divides they can as a way to create an inferior class and a superior class. They being part of the superior class. And they, wanting to keep the purity of that superior class, want to keep out anyone who can be deemed inferior. By using dehumanizing language, you play into their hands, because fascists need to believe that the people that they are deeming as part of the inferior class are subhuman. And so you can justify treating them in ways that are brutal and cruel and committing genocide against them or harming them or committing any type of violence against them because they are inferior. They are not human. So when you use their language, what you're doing is affirming that these people should be dehumanized. And the word illegals is a dehumanizing term, as we discussed before. So we've established that you've linguistically appeased fascists. Now let's talk about politically. By saying that we should ignore a major issue, one, as we've discussed before, you are insulting a portion of your constituency. That's not good for you electorally. If you are seen ignoring this issue or using the same language as another party, why would I vote for you? You're not making a clear delineation between yourself and your opponents. So why would I vote for you? Why would I put you in power? On top of that, you are creating a window for appeasement, which is exactly, and we know from history that appeasing fascists doesn't work. Neville Chamberlain, the then prime minister in the United Kingdom before Winston Churchill, attempted to appease Hitler, and that completely failed. And Joseph Stalin signed a non-aggression pact with Adolf Hitler, and Hitler was not supposed to cross from Poland into Russia. He did it anyway. We have seen appeasement of fascists fail as a policy. So fascists have a type of ideology that if you give them an inch, they run a mile. So, by saying that we should ignore a pertinent issue to our constituency, you are giving them what they want. They don't want to talk about immigration. They don't want to have a reform policy surrounding immigration. What they want is to just deport people who are already here and to stop anyone who they have deemed as an inferior class from entering the country. And by not holding fast, by not fighting for these individuals, you're not only losing an electoral battle, you're losing an ideological battle, because fascists need you to lay down. They need people not to oppose them. That is why one of the first targets of Nazis in Germany, one of the first targets for fascists in Italy were socialists, because they were their direct opposition. Because fascism can't stand up to opposition. All of the core pillars of fascism, racial policy, xenophobia, autarky, imperialism, totalitarianism, the belief in inferior and superior peoples, the needing of an elite special leader, all of those things don't stand up in a world that supports principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. So, by using their language, by using dehumanizing language, by saying that we should sidestep a policy in order to get them off of our backs, what you're doing is appeasing them. They can't stand confrontation. No matter from what ideological perspective you have, they can't stand that fight. That's why you very rarely see people from the fascist portions of Twitter in leftist circles or in liberal circles, because they're on Twitter, but they keep to themselves because it's easier. They know that their ideology can't stand up to a battle. So they sidestep us by saying, no, we should sidestep this policy as a way to tamper down on the popularity of the far right. You're actually doing the inverse. This is what they want. They want us to give up on any type of immigration reform because they don't want any more individuals coming into the United States who they have deemed an inferior class. And if we give up on this policy issue, we are playing into their hands, which is exactly the opposite of what this individual thinks. Which is why I said, I think this individual is suffering from Dunning-Kruger. I think this is an individual who is heavily involved in the internet's politics, but doesn't quite understand how the real world's politics works. So, in conclusion, my dear, it is you who are appeasing fascists by using their language and by suggesting that we shouldn't fight for a portion of our constituency that fascists use as a wedge, as a stepping stone toward power. So, if I were you or someone who agrees with Dog Kofifi, I would do yourself a favor and reflect and think about what he's actually saying. I would do yourself a favor and go find some fascists on Twitter. See how they talk. They're not hard to find. I would also encourage individuals to read Paul Hayes's Fascism. I would also encourage individuals, you could pick up a copy really, really cheap. I would also encourage you to pick up a copy of World Fascism. It's an encyclopedia that talks about all the topics from Nazism to generic fascism to authoritarianism. It's a really good reference for the tactics, the ideas of fascists generally. If you disagree, if you think that I'm wrong, you know exactly where to find me. I am the Lady Columbia. I'll be seeing you soon. Good night, good morning, good afternoon.